Ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you something, brother.
It's Talk Wrestling Live with Felix The Cat Katlovski
and Gemini Joe.
It doesn't matter what your name is.
We heard rumbling. No, we heard rumors. Oh my God, 5150 is LAX.
Listen live on Mondays at 4 p.m. on NorthCoastUnderground.com.
And follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
I'm in no mood for your wisecrack. Let's get it on.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Talk Wrestling Live. This is Felix The Cat Katlovski, and Gemini Joe's not here with us, but I hope he'll be back next week. We're going to be talking about a lot of wrestling news, and we're going to start with the Fear After Dark report, where we recap everything that happened last week on Impact Wrestling from the February 15th episode.
Are you scared? It's time for Fear After Dark.
I thought this was fun and games.
Fear is a funny thing.
¡Encelo! ¡Miedo!
Fear was meant for the art of survival. I am the new beginning.
We are for Ohio, because we are Ohio versus everything.
I'm better than every single one in that locker room. Tessa Blanchard is undeniable.
I'm not a man. I'm a machine.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Talk Wrestling Live. This is the Fear After Dark report, and like I mentioned, we're talking about everything that happened on Impact Wrestling last week during the February 15th episode. Now, if you were watching Impact Wrestling on Twitch rather than the Pursuit channel, we got to see Melissa Santos live hyping up the show before it started and during commercials as well. So we also saw Disco Inferno, that's Glenn Gilberti. He was playing kind of a backstage role as well. Gilberti, he took a stance on women's wrestling, saying that he's not a fan during the Impact Wrestling Twitch, and he also had a media conference where he pretty much talked about the same thing. He was saying how women's wrestling, it's like the WNBA, where you'll get to see some of the best female basketball players, but Glenn Gilberti feels that they just aren't as good as the guys. And Gilberti pointed out that in the past, no matter how good you are, no matter how skilled you were as a women's wrestler, it just came down to how attractive you are. And Gilberti, he feels that in women's wrestling, you can combine good looks and wrestling talent. But ultimately, even if you are green in the ring, it's still the sex appeal or how attractive you are that he's more of a fan of. Now, Gilberti feels that there's just too much TV time given to women's wrestling. And while there is a women's revolution taking place in wrestling, where we're seeing women getting the main event spots on some of the cards, and there's more TV time given to women's wrestling today than in the past, Gilberti, he's just not a fan of this. And now we don't have to agree with him, but it is his opinion and he is entitled to it. I mean, Gilberti mentioned how he couldn't watch the Mae Young Classic. He just couldn't sit through it, I guess. And Glenn feels that wrestling should be focused on men that want to fight each other, and that's just what clicks for him as a fan. Now, you have to remember, Disco Inferno, he was on the booking committees in both WCW, that's World Championship Wrestling, and Impact Wrestling. Now, while Disco was only giving his opinion, you can't deny that he does have 26 years of experience in the business, having been on the booking committees as an agent as well. So on one hand, he is giving his opinion, but at the same time, because of experience, it's kind of an educated opinion. Now, Gilberti, he's not trying to come off as sexist. These are his personal preferences in wrestling, and he's not just going to keep that to himself. You know, there are things where he's going to tell you to your face, whether you're a male wrestler or a female wrestler, and you do something that Disco Inferno doesn't like, well, he's going to let you know what's on his mind. So personally, I like how women's wrestling has been evolving. No longer is it just about purely sex appeal with pillow fights and bra and panties matches or lingerie matches. Now we see women's wrestling sometimes stealing the show and even getting the opportunity to shine and be showcased in the main event. And we're seeing more women's wrestling promotions rising up. Of course, there's Shimmer and there's Rise, but now We even have Women of Wrestling, that's a promotion of their own. They have a national TV deal on Access TV, which also airs New Japan Pro Wrestling. Now, everybody is talking about Tessa Blanchard, whether she's in Impact Wrestling or whether she's in WOW, Women of Wrestling. And even WWE recently had an all-women's pay-per-view, Evolution. So there is a demand for women's wrestling. So I feel as the demand grows, you're going to see more TV time being dedicated towards women's wrestling. Now, as far as intergender wrestling goes, well, I feel that it just depends on who the competitors are. I mean, somebody like a Jordan Grace or Jessica Havoc, Awesome Kong, Ronda Rousey, Shayna Baszler, even Nia Jax. These are all women who, in their own right, I feel they can compete with the men. And if you think back to Jeff Jarrett versus Chyna in the 90s in the WWF, there was that Good Housekeeping match. And it was still kind of seen as a sexist stipulation, but we did get to see Chyna get the win over Jeff Jarrett. And even Chyna, she was seen as a female combatant who could still go up against the men and even competed in the Royal Rumble match primarily against men. And this was during, I think maybe it was 1999, I believe. You can see women's wrestling evolving just through that. To kick off the show for Impact Wrestling, we had a street fight for the Knockouts Championship. That was Tessa Blanchard taking on Taya Valkyrie, who is the champion of the Knockouts. Now, it was cool to see both Knockouts paying homage to past wrestlers and stables. I mean, we had Tessa Blanchard. She was paying homage to Tully Blanchard as she was wearing that original Four Horsemen shirt, while Taya Valkyrie, she was supporting a stable, a group that she was previously part of in Lucha Libre AAA down in Mexico. And she was wearing that Perros del Ma t-shirt, and Taya looked like she was also paying homage to the Ultimate Warrior, sporting his signature face paint. Now, at one point, you had Tessa Blanchard. She threw up that hand gesture for the Four Horsemen, and Tessa also disrespected Taya by ripping the shirt off of Taya and spitting on her shirt. So, I mean, imagine if, somebody did that to you on the street. Would you just smile at them or would you do something back to them? So speaking of disrespect, just before all of this spitting business had occurred, you had Tessa Blanchard choking the life out of Taya with a cable. Tessa Blanchard just snapped right there. And both Knockouts were vicious in this match. I mean, this wasn't one of those matches where the women are just pulling hair. We saw chairs brought into this match from the very beginning. One of the highlights for me of this match was when Tessa Blanchard dropkicked Taya, who was leaning against the steel guardrail, and the chair was placed right on her face. So when we saw that dropkick, it was insane. I mean, we also saw both combatants hitting each other with metal baking sheets. That's not my idea of a good time, but Valkyrie, she poured a beverage at Tessa Blanchard's face, probably getting back at her for that dropkick I mentioned earlier. And at one point, I thought we were watching one of those bullfighting shows in Mexico when you had Tessa Blanchard. She was going for that spear, and she missed Taya, and instead, her face connected with the steel chair, which was wedged right into that turnbuckle in the corner. And Taya really wanted to hurt Tessa when she went for the chair and started whacking the baking sheet into Tessa's groin. I mean, that has to be painful. And at one point we saw Tessa, she was looking helpless in the corner as Taya hit that Meteora, but later in the match, Taya failed to hit her finishing move, the Road to Valhalla, and that's when Tessa took back control of the match. And Tessa, she got Taya's head stuck in that chair, and she just stomped on her, and that just looked brutal. Like I said, just vicious in this match. And Tessa, she started to get carried away. She was bringing just a bunch of chairs to the ring from the outside, because when she went to the turnbuckle with that chair, you had Taya, she put her in the Samoan drop, and it was from the top rope onto that chair. So Tessa kind of made a mistake right there, miscalculated. And there were 2 sick spots where Tessa delivered 2 spears to Taya on this thick wooden canvas in the corner, and it just wouldn't break. But the fans wanted to see something break in half, so Tessa, she brought out a table from under the ring, and now this is where Tessa really messed up, because right when she just placed Taya on that table, again, Tessa tried to go for that top rope, and that's when Taya pushed Tessa off the top rope to the outside, and then you had Taya hit that splash on Tessa from the top rope to the outside, and now we only saw a 2 count when you had Taya bringing Tessa back in for the pin, so Taya knew that she had to do something to close out the match. So Taya, she used that double stomp to put Tessa through the table, and that's how she got the 3-count victory. So your winner, and still Impact Knockouts champion, Taya Valkyrie. So we were taken backstage to meet Team Impact, and we know it's Sami Callihan from OVE. He was joined by Fallah Bahh, Eddie Edwards, and Eli Drake. Now, from the start, this team, they were just looking very shaky. I mean, you have Sami Callihan, somehow he's deciding that he should be the team captain. I mean, did anybody agree to that? I have no idea how Fallah Bahh felt about that, because his only reaction is repeating his last name, Bahh. He doesn't speak English, I don't think. And then you had Eddie Edwards. He was getting in Callahan's face. And who can forget what rivalry those two had when Eddie Edwards almost lost his eye because of Callahan during their past at Impact Wrestling. Now, this whole team is not on the same page. That's pretty clear, because you already have some kind of beef with Eli Drake and Eddie Edwards, because previously you had Eli kept telling Eddie not to use that kendo stick in his matches, and instead Eli would be the one to use it. So Eli, he tries to get everybody to focus on the prize because there's a trophy and there's money on the line. And Callahan, he seems to like that, so he eases up. And Eli, he tries to strategize on how to use Fallah Bahh as a human weapon by having him roll over on all of their opponents like a human bulldozer. And guess what Eli's tip is for Eddie Edwards? Once again, Eli, he's telling Eddie not to use that kendo stick. And this really has to be pissing off Eddie Edwards, because Eli Drake, he looks like a hypocrite over here. He's telling Eddie Edwards not to use that kendo stick each week, and then you have Eli Drake using it instead. So should Eddie Edwards listen to Eli Drake? I don't think so. Then we saw Ethan Page. He was taking on Willie Mack. And once again, you don't have Matt Sydal to help Ethan Page, so it looks like he's going to have to watch his own back at Impact Wrestling. And early into the match, you already had Willie Mack hitting his corkscrew elbow from the top rope. And then the greatest thing just happened in pro wrestling. No, it wasn't the bean dip scoop, but it was that instant classic purple nurple being used by Willie Mack on Ethan Page. And you can tell that that had to hurt, because the nipple, it's a really sensitive body part with many nerves. I mean, you had Ethan Page, he was screaming in pain. And Ethan Page, he really didn't put much of a fight. I mean, yeah, there was some chops, there was a running DDT and maybe an enziguri, but with Willie Mack, we saw him go for that cannonball from the top, and I also remember a standing shooting star press. And even later, you had Mack, he would finish that match with a stunner, and then you had a pin for the win. So Willie Mack was your winner in that match. Now, during the commercial break on Impact on Twitch, we did see Scarlett Bordeaux, and she was wearing some really revealing clothing, and it looked like something Sable would have worn for Playboy in the 1990s. I mean, Scarlett, she was talking about how she likes to do squats in public, that exercise move. So Scarlett turned around and she showed Melissa Santos her squatting form, and she was preparing to train for her in-ring debut for when Impact Wrestling returns to Las Vegas. And then we saw Killer Kross. He was backstage and he was sending a message to Johnny Impact. He was telling him that it would take a miracle for Johnny to keep the championship, and Kross pointed out that it is 3 against 1. But I really think he was exaggerating, because in reality, everyone who's out there is really out for their own interest. Killer Kross, he warned Johnny Impact that if his mind wanders, that's when he's going to be the most vulnerable to lose that Impact World Championship. So clearly Johnny Impact, he needs to stay focused. And once again, Killer Kross reminded us that everybody pays the toll. And then we saw OVE, and that's Dave and Jake Christ. They were following Willie Mack backstage, who was celebrating his win over Ethan Page. So I guess OVE, they were just stalking Willie Mack over there. Then we got to meet some of the members of Team AAA from Lucha Libre AAA. You had Psycho Clown, and he said that his team wants to face the best that Impact Wrestling has to offer, and that Team AAA wants to win and bring that gold home to keep it in Mexico. While Puma King, he let us know that he was wrestling not just for the gold, but for the honor and pride. because he wants the World Cup to stay in Mexico, like I said earlier. And then you had Sami Callihan, who proclaimed himself as the captain of Team Impact Wrestling. He wasn't really choosing his battles wisely. I mean, instead of being focused on that World Cup like Team TWL was, you had Callihan, he had something to get off his chest with Rich Swann. I mean, he's not focused on this match. He's got Rich Swann on his mind. And Callihan had something to get off his chest with Rich Swann, like I said. So Callihan, he came to the ring and he told Rich Swann to get closer to the monitor and listen. Now Callihan said that himself and Rich Swann are truly brothers because of their history. And Callihan went on to say that Rich Swann's interview from 2 weeks ago was nothing but fake news. Callihan, he brought up how he's been offering Swann an OVE t-shirt to join the family, but Rich Swann would keep turning it down. So Callihan wanted to talk to him in the ring, and we learned that it was Rich Swann's birthday. And once again, Rich Swann turned down Callihan's gift, that OVE shirt. So Rich Swann gave Callihan two options. He said, we can do things the easy way or the hard way. But Callihan kept reminding Swann that it would be in Swann's best interest to just put the shirt on, so Callihan tried to convince him by just throwing the shirt at Rich Swann's face. Now, that's not really respectful, so I don't think that's going to get Rich Swann to put on the shirt. So obviously this didn't make Rich Swann happy, and he threw the shirt right back at Callihan. But that just caused Callihan to start attacking Rich Swann, and Swann was able to hit that high-risk Phoenix Splash to the outside on Callihan, but this only pissed off Callihan even more, because then Callihan threw Swann onto the ramp, and eventually Callihan did the pile driver on Rich Swann on the stage, only to throw him off the stage, and I believe Rich Swann would land on that table and that table would break. And you had the refs, they tried to stop Sami Callihan, and I don't really think this is how family or brothers act like, so maybe Rich Swann wasn't talking fake news when he said that Callihan's demands is not something that family does. So in the next match, you had Sami Callihan, Eli Drake, Eddie Edwards, and Fallah Bahh, that's Team Impact, and they were facing Team AAA, Lucha Libre AAA, that's Psycho Clown, Puma King, Hijo del Vikingo, and Aerostar for the World Cup in an elimination 8-man tag team match. So Fallah Bahh used his strategy with that belly-to-belly and a steamroller on Puma King. Now, both teams worked really well together, and there wasn't really much miscommunication till the very first elimination. And that's when Eli Drake and Eddie Edwards, once again, they were fighting over who was going to use that kendo stick in the match. And now you have Killer Kross. I mentioned him. He was talking about wandering minds, and we saw that Eli Drake, he wasn't focused when he was bickering right there with Eddie Edwards, and it allowed Puma King to outsmart Eli Drake and get that 3 count eliminating Eli Drake. And Eddie Edwards did nothing to help his partner out, he just watched. So later we would see Fallah Bahh, he would eliminate Vikingo with the running power slam and a pin, and the next elimination would happen when Fallah Bahh and Aerostar, they were battling, and you had Fallah Bahh looking to connect with the Vader Bomb, but his arms, they were all tied up in that jackknife pin, and that allowed Aerostar to eliminate Fallah Bahh. So Team Impact is now at a disadvantage with Eli Drake and Fallah Bahh already eliminated, leaving in Eddie Edwards and Callihan in this match. So while Team AAA had Psycho Clown and Puma King, you had Aerostar leaving, and then Callihan and Eddie Edwards, they have beef from their past, like I mentioned, but now they have to work together and coexist. So just when Callihan was the legal man, you had Eddie Edwards tagging himself in, and that did not make Callihan happy. There's already miscommunication over there. I mean, they can't agree on who the legal man's going to be. So Eddie Edwards, he tried to hit that Boston knee party on Aerostar when Aerostar missed the springboard splash, and Eddie Edwards, he eliminated Aerostar with the pin that followed. Then you had Eddie Edwards, he tried to toss Puma King out of the ring, but Puma King, he held on like a cat that he is, and Puma King got some kicks in on Eddie, and that's when Callihan tagged himself in, and Callihan eliminated Puma King with a powerbomb and a pile driver with the pin. So imagine what petitions we're going to be hearing from PETA, that animal rights protection group, with Callihan pile driving that feline. So Psycho Clown, he was the last man left on AAA, and Callihan and Eddie Edwards were the last men left on Team Impact, and you had Psycho Clown being outnumbered pretty much. So we saw Eddie Edwards, he was once again going for that Boston knee party, and this time on Psycho Clown. But you had more miscommunication, and Callahan, he wanted to be the man to take out the Clown. So he tossed his own partner, Eddie Edwards. And, I mean, this is his remaining tag team partner. I mean, if Eddie Edwards loses, then Callahan would be the last man on his team left. So I don't know what he was thinking right there. Now, Psycho Clown, he really knew he was getting under the skin of Team Impact. And that's when Psycho Clown, he evened up the playing field with that small package pin on Callahan. And Team AAA, they got another elimination against Team Impact. And now it was one-on-one between Psycho Clown and Eddie Edwards, the very last men representing their teams. So Eddie and Psycho Clown, they battled for a while, and just when Eddie Edwards had the advantage with that clothesline on Psycho Clown, the already eliminated Eli Drake, he brought out Kenny, that kendo stick, to the ring, and instead of helping Eddie Edwards, his tag team partner, you had Callahan. He was only out there to distract Eddie Edwards, like he had a shiny object, so obviously you gotta focus your attention on that instead of the match. So you had Eddie Edwards being distracted right there, and Psycho Clown, he sent Eddie to the outside, and that's when Eli Drake, he hit Eddie with that kendo stick. He hit his own partner. I mean, what was he thinking? Clearly, he was not focused on this match, and his head was somewhere else. Like, he was focusing on Eddie Edwards and his beef with him instead. So ironically, you had Psycho Clown, he went for the backstabber, that's a move, and then he went for a pin to eliminate Eddie Edwards, and that's how Psycho Clown kept the World Cup gold in Mexico for AAA. So your winners, of course, Team AAA in that match. And then we saw backstage, we had Brian Cage. He was lifting dumbbells, just getting ready for his 4-way match for that main event. And we also saw a video hyping the return of Reno Scum when Impact Wrestling returns to Las Vegas. So we saw a replay of the Lucha Bros match. The Lucha Bros, Pentagon Jr. and Phoenix, they defeated LAX to win the Impact Wrestling Tag Team Championship. And now Conan is backstage telling LAX that Conan should have listened to his gut. He knew LAX were going to lose to the Lucha Bros. And when one of the members of LAX started trash talking to the Lucha Bros, that's when LAX were still the champions. I think all the trash talking did was fire up the Lucha Bros, and it helped motivate them to get the win. So now you have Conan, he's working on getting LAX that rematch, but it will be their very last rematch because LAX is family and Conan, he doesn't want to lose them. And then we saw Scarlett Bordeaux. She was waking up from her nap and reminding everyone about her in-ring debut match, which will be airing later this week on Impact Wrestling when the company returns to Las Vegas. And we also learned that Eli Drake would be facing Eddie Edwards in Las Vegas as well. So now in the main event, we have Johnny Impact, the champion of the Impact World Championship. He was taking on Killer Kross, as well as Moose, as well as Brian Cage in that 4-way match. And in that match, you had Brian Cage. He arrived to the ring looking like a combination of Jax and Kano from Mortal Kombat. I mean, he had that metal arm, and then he had that metal half mask piece on his face. Now, I know the props are supposed to look cool, but you can clearly tell that he's wearing zip ties to hold everything in place. I mean, it's a good thing that he doesn't wrestle wearing all that stuff because that metal arm doesn't look too sturdy. So for most of the match, Killer Kross and Moose, they worked as a team, while Cage and Johnny Impact, they were out for themselves. And it wasn't until Moose applied that standing power bomb, but right when Moose went for the pin, Kross broke it up, and the two argued. I mean, these two guys are used to being partners, but in this match, you can only have one winner. Now, it's a good strategy to work on your opponents first, and then concentrate on the guy that you kind of trust more when you're going at it at the end. But these two just, when they found opportunities, that's when they were going at each other, kind of backstabbing each other, because there can only be one winner, there can only be one champion, and that's what it's all about. So Moose, he hit another power bomb, and this time it was on Brian Cage, but instead of pinning Cage, Moose tried to pin Killer Kross. Now, this did not make Killer Kross happy, but you had Moose, he tried to reach out to Killer Kross to hold their peace and work as a unit to continue that. Now, Killer Kross, he wasn't that dumb. He played along a little bit with Moose, and he hugged him, but it wasn't until he put Moose in the Northern Lights. With Moose and Kross, they were going at it, and this allowed Johnny Impact to get in that attack. But he would then shift his focus back to Brian Cage. Now, the match went on until Brian Cage took a high-angle suplex from Killer Kross. But remember, this is Brian Cage that we're talking about, so it had no effect on him at all. And Cage would hit that drill claw on Killer Kross, and around the same time, that's when Johnny Impact hit the Starship Pain on Moose. And that's how he got the 3 count in. Now, this was strange because Brian Cage, he could have broken up the pin, and instead he decided to pin Killer Kross. Maybe Cage thought that Moose would kick out of Johnny Impact's pin. I really don't know what he was thinking, but that's how Brian Cage did not get that victory. He could have been the champion. Instead, we had the winner and still Impact World Champion, Johnny Impact. Now, after the match, you had Brian Cage. He went face-to-face with Johnny Impact, but the two, they had cooler heads, as Johnny Impact celebrated his win on the ramp with that title. So that's all I can report for Impact Wrestling last week's episode on the Pursuit Network and the Twitch special on there. That was from Uncaged. And when we come back from break, we'll be talking about what's coming up to Impact Wrestling for our report on Lights Out.
Man, this sucks. I can't go to the baseball game because I have to pack. We're moving next week and I have to get enough large boxes.
Did someone say oxes?
No, I said boxes. Ox's boxes are strong like an ox and durable for moving trips.
They're also biodegradable, which is just great for the environment. Download the Ox's Boxes app on your phone today, and your first box is free. And now we're offering same-day deliveries if you order before 4 p.m. on any given business day. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter.
Ride the winds flying far and soaring like a hawk.
Run a marathon with the endurance of a tiger.
Swim across the ocean like a dolphin.
Beast Energy X. Do you have it in you?
Buy Beast Energy X at all Waffle Max locations and unleash the beast in you.
Join the Beast Energy X fan club and get free perks. Sign up by following us on Twitter at Beast Energy X.
Welcome back to Talk Wrestling Live.
Follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
I'm not finished with you!
And now, let's get back to the show.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Talk Wrestling Live. We just talked about Fear After Dark, where we recapped everything from last week's Uncaged special of Impact Wrestling from February 15th. And now we're going to get the show kicked off with Lights Out, so let's kick off the show with Lights Out.
Shut up, 5. A 10 is talking.
I'm surprised you're containing yourself. It's like looking at a work of art, John. Scarlett Bordeaux has arrived on Impact Wrestling. Oh my God.
Hey, tell them to cover up. I will not be hot-shamed.
Talk about making an impact.
Make wrestling sexy again.
Scarlett Bordeaux has arrived. And now she's leaving, and it's, oh Lord.
Turn the lights down low, because it's time for Impact Lights Out.
Hey everybody, so it's time to talk about Impact Wrestling Lights Out, where I talk about everything that's coming soon to Impact Wrestling. So what we know so far is the matches for this week's Impact Wrestling February 22nd, and we know that Impact Wrestling is returning to Sin City as Impact Wrestling is coming to Las Vegas once again. They're going to be in the Sam's Town Casino, and we know that Johnny Impact, he's going to kick off the show after he retained his Impact Wrestling World Championship from last week's four-way match from Uncaged against Moose, Killer Kross, Brian Cage as well. So then we're also going to have Eli Drake taking on Eddie Edwards, because you saw there was friction in their team for Team Impact. I mean, they were just not focused at all going up against Team Lucha Libre AAA. And Eli Drake and Eddie Edwards, even before this World Cup had happened, they had been bickering. Eli's telling Eddie Edwards, stop using the kendo stick. And instead you have Eli Drake. He's the one that uses the kendo stick instead, and he just looks like a hypocrite. I mean, sure, Eli Drake was talking about how Eddie Edwards, he wanted to see Eddie Edwards back to that old Eddie Edwards that he used to be when he was the world champion, when he was a successful tag team champion on the American Wolves. And then, of course, we know he went crazy with that feud with Sami Callihan, and he was kicked out of his house by his wife. He was even committed to Shady Acres, that mental facility, and Raven helped him get out of there. He gave him that key card. And Raven, this guy from ECW, this hardcore wrestling promotion, Raven told him, you're not crazy enough. You're not going far enough. So Eddie Edwards, he still wants to keep that kendo stick Kenny that he always brings to the ring. So these two guys, they're going to settle their beef in the ring because Eli Drake, he can't just keep on telling Eddie Edwards not to use that kendo stick. Eddie Edwards is going to use it if he wants to. I mean, the guy's crazy. Then Eddie Edwards' own wife, Alicia Edwards, she's going to be in action as well. Yes, she's a wrestler at Impact Wrestling. She's going to be taking on Delilah Doom. I think we previously seen Delilah Doom on some of the Twitch specials on Impact Wrestling. And I think I also got to see her out in California for bar wrestling. So it's really cool how I got to see a lot of these performers in, different places all across the country. Now, we also know that the Rascals, that's that stable with Desmond Xavier and Zach Wentz, they're going to be taking on the Desi Hit Squad. That's Rohit Raju and Raj. And then we also know that next week on Impact Wrestling for March 1st, Reno Scum, they're a tag team from Las Vegas. They're going to be returning to Impact Wrestling when they come back to Vegas for that set of tapings. And I believe these tapings have already happened. They went from the February 15th till the 17th, and that's when they taped the shows. Now we're going to be able to see how it airs and how it's presented for television. So I always like to see how that comes off. Fans always talk about spoilers and everything, but spoilers don't really do it for me. I want to see how it is presented on TV, because presentation's everything. Well, that about does it for the Talk Wrestling Live show with Lights Out, and we're going to be ending the show shortly, and we hope that you join us next week on same time, Mondays, 4 o'clock till 5 o'clock. We go later sometimes, so we're here for the overrun. And we hope you listen next week on NorthCoastUnderground.com, where the underground starts with you.
You've been listening to Talk Wrestling Live. Listen live on Mondays at 4 p.m. on NorthCoastUnderground.com.
And follow us on Twitter at TWL 24/7.
Goodbye and good night. Bad. Rest in